What's up, guys? This is Jay Griff. Welcome back to the Dark Souls 2 Blog of Pain. So, this episode is going to be my final word on the plot. It's probably going to be my longest episode. It might even be a multi-parter. I don't know. The plot of this game. Over the course of my blogs, I have talked a lot about the connections of Drangleic to Old Lordran. But I've said very little about the current setting. I've said very little about Drangleic. I've said very little about your current objective. Why? Well, I've beaten the game now. I'm at the end, and I'm looking back, and, the bluntest opinion I can come up with is who cares? Who cares about Drangleic? Drangleic was irrelevant. Its connections to Lordran were important. Its connections to the old lords were important, but Drangleic almost did not matter at all. It was a placeholder. That's a little unfair, but that's the bluntest opinion. I think it's got a lot to do with what the game told you. It's got a lot to do with how it told you. Now, to say that Dark Souls 1 told you more than Dark Souls 2 would be untrue. It'd be very untrue. But I think the way it told things was a lot more effective. In Dark Souls 1, what you were told from the onset is you need to escape the asylum, you need to ring the bell of awakening, and you need to fulfill the prophecy, presumably to end the curse of the undead. Now, as you go along, you discover there are two bells. Then eventually your quest becomes, after ringing those bells, okay, now you need to get to Anor Londo. Once you've been to Anor Londo, it becomes, okay, you've got this thing called the Lord Vessel. You need to satiate it to enter the Firelink altar, and the only way to do that is to kill all of the lords, because you need their souls. Sorry, but they gotta go. Now, in Dark Souls 2, you don't get much at the onset. You really don't get much. You get a really stupid, really cryptic conversations with the Firekeepers, and then you meet the Emerald Herald. And the first words out of her mouth are you the next monarch? What the hell? What does that mean? Then she tells you to seek the souls of the ineffable and seek the king of Drangleic, who we discover later is King Vendrick. So once again, you're given no real direction. She doesn't tell you, go over there, do this thing. She tells you, do this grand thing, somehow, some way, somewhere, and then don't even bring it back to me. You got to take it somewhere else. I don't know. So you get no real direction. The NPCs, on the other hand, they're less cryptic, and they say a lot more than they did in Dark Souls 1. But that's a double-edged sword, because a lot of times what they have to say does not fucking matter at all. They say a lot of irrelevant bullcrap to you. So you got to sift through that too to find the little kernels of what might be truth, what might be fiction, and what definitely is the plots. Now, you don't know much about the Emerald Herald. You don't know who she is, where she comes from, why she holds so much power over you. You don't level up at the bonfires anymore, remember? You do it through the Emerald Herald. She gave you the Estus Flask. You didn't get it from Oscar. She powers that Estus Flask up. So everything's hinging on her. She basically owns you. And you don't know why. You're not told anything of substance about Drangleic for that matter. You get a little bit here and there from the NPCs. You get a little bit here and there from the gear. But it gets really confusing really quickly because some of the gear is area specific. And it doesn't seem like those areas belong to Drangleic at all. And if they do, they didn't at one point or another. Harvest Valley, the Old Iron King. Pretty damn sure the King of Drangleic was not cool with there being a second king inside his sphere of influence, so those two didn't exist at the same time. So everything you find there is about Harvest Valley, the Old Iron Keep, the Old Iron King. It's not about Drangleic. And you're not really certain which one existed when, which came first. What you do know, per se, about anything, is that the undead curse is back. You know it's back in a big way. And you know it's been back for a long time. Because there's undead everywhere. And the undead curse, we can infer from cutscenes and the like, doesn't actually spread very quickly. It spreads kind of slowly and breeds a special type of panic among the populace because, like, yeah, it spreads slowly, but how do you stop it? Nobody seems to know. And whenever a solution is found, I don't think anybody ever remembers that that solution was found because the person that finds it dies. And what you know about the undead this time is that they are presumably driven by an unknown force to travel to Drangleic and to meet the king. You find this out through your conversations with the Firekeepers and with the Emerald Herald. You're not told why any of that is. Going back to another one of her statements, she told you to seek the souls of the ineffable. Okay, ineffable, by definition, means too great or extreme to be described in words. And that immediately makes me think of the great souls. The four great souls. The light soul, the life soul, the dead soul, and the dark soul. I've already said the dark soul's not in this game, though. So we can presume that we're talking about a shard of one of those great souls as well. The souls that you gather by defeating the great beings, by defeating the lost sinner, the Old Iron King, the Rotten, and the Duke Steer Frasia, are not these four great souls. They're not the souls of the four great beings. They are the souls specific to those beings. And in the case of the Duke Steer Frasia, you do not get a great soul that you can examine. It does not appear in your inventory. It says you embraced it, but you can never examine it and look at it. You get the Duke Steer Frasia's soul, but that's a lesser soul. That's a boss soul. That's not a great soul. But if you use a bonfire ascetic, as I discovered while trying to figure out what the hell bonfire ascetics did, I threw one into the bonfire down in the gutter. Or not the gutter, actually, a Black Gulch. I threw it into the one next to the Rotten's boss room because I had farmed the area out to where nothing respawned anymore. Enemies there dropped really valuable crafting items, so I wanted them to come back. And I knew that the bonfire ascetics were supposed to respawn enemies. I knew it made them harder, and what it turns out it does is it puts the game in New Game Plus. So I threw the bonfire ascetic in the bonfire. It said, "What is done cannot be undone." All the summon signs reappeared. For the NPCs that I didn't summon the first time, and for all the human players that were down there, they were all back. The boss door was suddenly foggy again. All the enemies came back. So I decided to have a second round with the Rotten, because whatever. So I killed him. And I got 2 souls this time. Soul of the Rotten, so I've got 2 of those, which doesn't make any sense, but... And the soul of the great dead one. That is Nito's soul. That is the soul of the first of the dead. So I immediately went back, through bonfire ascetics, in the bonfires for the Old Iron King and for the Lost Sinner, and sure enough, Old Iron King had the Old King soul, which is clearly the soul of Gwyn, and the Lost Sinner had the soul of the Witch of Izalith. I actually forget at this exact moment what that soul was per se called, but it was the Witch of Izalith's soul. It basically says so in the description. So those are the great souls you're going after, and the soul in the bottom of where the Duke Steer Frasia is definitely belonged to Seath. Now, what are those souls doing? Why do they matter this time? Mattered before. Mattered a lot. Gwyn was in Firelink Altar. He was keeping the first flame lit. The Witch of Izalith had accidentally created the Flame of Chaos trying to make a second first flame. So she was basically trapped. And she was constantly spitting out new demons. Nito was just trying to make sure that death didn't stop being a thing within the world. He was trying to make sure death continued, and the undead must have pissed him off so fucking much. Because here come these bastards who can't die. And it's like, fuck you, that is not what we do down here. And now Seath was pretty much just a pure villain. He sucked. He was just doing experiments and stuff. But that's probably why he's got the smallest part this time around. But what are those souls doing this time around? What are they doing to make Drangleic interesting and dynamic? Nothing. The Witch of Izalith, the Lost Sinner, she's sitting in a cell, constantly punishing herself for something she did before. What's Seath doing? He's in the bottom of a cave making spiders. What's Nito doing? He's at the bottom of another cave, building statues. What's Gwyn doing? He is taking a lava bath. Exciting. A lot of top tier business the Great Souls have been up to. Now the Great Souls may be damaged. They're probably not complete anymore. I put them through the first flame. That's got to take some sort of toll on them. But why'd they matter? Why? You know, they're not doing anything. So as time goes on, we continue with the game. If you're talking to Xiaoqua, the cat, and the Herald, along with other NPCs, you eventually find out that King Vendrick allegedly unlocked the essence of the soul. And there's some conversation you can have with Xiaoqua after you have all the great souls, and she's like, "You smell just like the king did." But now he's all plumb rotten. Okay, so that tells you that the king once held the great souls. You know that the king unlocked the essence of the soul. You also know, through dialogue, of course, that King Vendrick crossed the sea and stole something from the giants at the behest of the queen. Returned, and it started the war with the giants. I'm pretty damn sure what he stole from them was one, if not all four, of the great souls. Just seems to make sense to me. You don't get a lot of evidence to that. You don't get any evidence, really, to what necessarily caused it, except that he stole something, and then they really wanted it back, and they lost. Now, you find out a little bit after that supposedly Vendrick is the king who linked the fire. That's a very significant phrase. Linking the fire is what Gwyn and the Chosen Undead did. They sacrificed their souls, along with every other soul they brought with them, to keep the first flame burning. Now, those souls were found in the first flame, so they're probably part of the first flame. So them leaving it probably had something to do with the first flame's decline. Point is, linking the fire is a big deal. And he eventually ended up in the undead crypt. And when you find him there, he is a gigantic hollow. Okay. Now, I'm probably alone in this theory. By the time this video goes up, there are probably Dark Souls 2 lore videos from VatiVidya and Epic Name Bro and everybody out there who probably know better than me, but just my interpretation, Griff Cannon here, I don't think that's true. I don't think he did that. And I have a couple reasons as to why. Reason number one, linking the fire is the only thing we know about that can end the undead curse. Which leads me into reason number two. The Bastille is still brimming with undead. We can infer from the fact that the flexible sentries are in both the Bastille, or the Bastille, or however one you pronounce it, and Drangleic Castle, that Bastille was built by Drangleic. It was maintained by Drangleic, and we know from the gear there that it was a place the undead were put to be forgotten about. If King Vendrick built that, and then linked the fire that would have destroyed the undead curse. There would have been the Bastille would have emptied. It never happened. The Bastille is still full, completely. Now you could say maybe it emptied, the undead came back, and they kind of wandered back in there. Okay, valid. Except, reason number 3, the Huntsman's Copse is also full of the undead. And the undead who were once the guards there. You can find out from gear descriptions that the Undead Copse was a place where undead were forcibly placed. And that the guards once watched over them. However, all distinction between the undead who were put there and the guards tasked with keeping them in has been lost, because the guards themselves are undead. Now, we also know from gear that Huntsman's Copse is a holding of the Old Iron King. It is not a holding of Drangleic. It was not built by Drangleic. So that means at a different time, when Drangleic was not a thing, or after Drangleic had been a thing, the Huntsman's Copse was put there. Things stopped making sense if at any point the undead curse was ended, and there's undead in both the Bastille and the Huntsman's Copse, and the Huntsman's Copse guards went hollow. They caught the curse themselves and became undead and never left. That doesn't make any sense chronologically. Now you could argue with me there too. We could go on for hours, literally hours. I've got pages of notes on this subject about the Old Iron King and King Vendrick and where they could possibly fit into this convoluted ass-backwards timeline. But we don't have that kind of time, so I'm not going to get into that. Maybe I'll make another video on it one day, but they can't both be full if somebody linked the fire. They just can't. Unless it is said that time is convoluted in Lordran. So you don't really ever know when anything is per se happening. But that typically extends only to you having interactions with individuals. Not in one area you're in one timeline, in another area you're in a different timeline. It's always your timeline. But at some point you might crash into somebody else's, i.e. Solaire, i.e. Lautrec. Not, when you were in Sen's Fortress, it was 1910, and then when you rose to Anor Londo, it was 2030. No, that's not how the fucking thing works. It's not that busted. So, and then there's reason number 4, which is that King Vendrick still has a body. Okay, you can't go into Firelink Altar and link the fire and then come out again. You can't do that. Nobody can do that. You are consumed by the first flame, body and soul. The only reason that Lord Gwyn was not completely consumed by the flame and went hollow inside the altar is because, inside the shrine rather, altar, is because he was one of the original lords. His soul, which is necessary to keep it going, is his. It's part of him. He's not gonna be destroyed completely until his soul is extinguished or taken. And he didn't take it out. He split it and gave part of it to the fire. He had already split it, I think, 3 times before. Vendrick's just a guy. He's just a person. He's a king. Yeah, he apparently became a giant, but he also went to war with the giants. And you amassed many souls of the giants, so maybe he tried to absorb them in an effort to grow more powerful. But he was just a guy, okay? He's not a lord. He does not possess a lord soul of his own. So if he linked the fire, he would have to offer lord souls to it, and in the process would be destroyed. especially if the Lord Vessel is still a thing, if it's still sitting out there and you have to satiate the Lord Vessel to open it up. Vendrick's not going to live. And even if he could withstand the flame and somehow go hollow in there, it would take hundreds of years for the first flame to then subside again and for anyone of his followers to then walk in there and take him back out. Because he was mindless. When you find him, he's literally just walking in a circle, dragging his sword. You have to hit him a lot and do a ton of damage to him to get him to notice you at all. He did not link the fire. He didn't. I don't believe it. And then there's reason number 5. And that's the ending. Okay? The ending, as the narrator would have you believe it, is that you have ascended to the throne and you have chosen to link the fire. You do not link the fire in that ending. You don't do it. What you do in that ending is you sit on a throne of bare rock inside of a tomb, and then somebody locks you the fuck in there. You are not in the Firelink altar, and linking the fire is not a symbolic act. It is very much a physical act. I am going to roll footage of the chosen undead doing it and lighting his ass on fire. You burn. You are consumed. Your soul, along with every other soul you are carrying, is utterly destroyed, except the great souls. Only the great souls, which are from the first flame, can return to it and eventually remanifest. Everything else is annihilated. Even the chosen undead, the original badass who went through way more difficult fights than are in this game, was annihilated. And we know this because you find his ashes and throw them into the bonfires to strengthen your own Estus flasks. You didn't just link the fire, buddy. You sat on a fucking piece of rock and let somebody lock you in. So what the fuck's going on? What is happening in Dark Souls 2? Well, again, Griff canon, not real canon, because who knows? And this is a bit of a conspiracy theory, but my theory on what happened in Dark Souls 2 is you were being fooled from the word go. From the very beginning, you are prodded along by a group of firekeepers who have abandoned their duties and are not manning the bonfires. So they cannot be trusted. But you don't have any other choice, because you're not told anything else and don't have any other options within the game other than to proceed. And presumably your character would be compelled to follow what they say, because there's an unnatural compulsion that comes along with being part of the undead community, so to say. The Emerald Herald claims at one point that you are going to take her place. She says this once. She says it almost in passing, so it's easy to miss. But she says it. She says, you are going to be the one to take my place. And she says you're going to be the next the next monarch. But she's not on that throne when you walk in there. Nobody's on that throne. Nobody. There's 3 bosses guarding it. There's the Throne Watcher, the Throne Defender, and then there's Nasandra, the Queen. They're all defending it. None of them are on it. None of them can get to it. As you ascend the throne, you can hear the Emerald Herald. She's narrating it. And she says that you can choose to forsake... She says, something. She says, chosen undead who will link the fire. You may choose to forsake this calling, or fulfill your duty. But unlike in Dark Souls 1, you don't get a choice. Dark Souls 1, you could link that fire. You had to hit a button to do it. But you could also turn your happy ass around and walk right the fuck back out after killing Gwyn. And what it did was it basically extinguished the first flame and ushered in the Age of Dark. Now, that's a non-canon ending, but the choice is given to you. In this one, she acts like you have the choice. She narrates it, but at that point, your control is gone. You're watching a cutscene. It's over. The cutscene rolls. The game ends. You, the new chosen undead, the bearer of the curse, you are the only fucker who could maybe have been powerful enough to link that fire, to have maybe had enough gumption in your own soul to keep that thing going. And you had all the great souls, you had all the Lord souls, you had everything you needed to do it. But because you got punked, because you got tricked, and because you just listened to what this bitch says, you didn't link the fire. You chose to go hollow on a forgotten throne in a locked tomb where no one can get in, but with the ring of the king, the seal of the king, is required to open the door just to get in there. And then you need all the Lord souls to get to the throne. And guess where the ring is? It's on your fucking hand. So it's not getting out of there anytime soon, is it? You rule nothing. There is no Drangleic anymore. It is long destroyed, long fallen. And you save no one, because you didn't link the fire. You have not ended the curse. You've done nothing. You've been had. You have been had. And in the process, you have mopped up all of the remnants of Drangleic. You swept it away, just like old Lordran. So now Drangleic 2 will probably be completely forgotten. But unlike Lordran, it didn't matter in the first place. There's no power that is going to endure of Drangleic. Meanwhile, this entire game, you, especially my character, have trudged on using the power of Lordran, the power of miracles of Gwyn, miracles of Guinevere, spells of the Dragon Academy, spells invented by Seath and Big Hat Londo. Or Logan, excuse me, Big Hat Logan. Got him confused with New Londo for a second there. And even in killing the manifestation of the Dark Soul, which was Nasandra, which you find out by reading the description of the gear you can make with her soul, you killed her. You've got her soul. You've got the biggest chunk of the Dark Soul that has probably been seen since Dark Souls 1. Since the destruction, since the death of Manus and his reassimilation to the First Flame, because you were carrying his soul when you went in there. You killed her, you've got her soul, and you're just going to go hollow over the next 100 years and sit in your fucking room. You're not going to the First Flame. You're not going to give that back to the First Flame. And the Dark Soul, remember, the Dark Soul is a Lord Soul. It's a vital component of the First Flame in keeping the Abyss at bay. So even though we haven't seen a whole lot of the Abyss in this game, very little in fact, the only part of it you really get to see per se is Nasandra. She is abyssed to hell. But now you can't give any of these things to the First Flame because you're selfishly sitting in there with them, because you've been tricked. That's what I think went on in Dark Souls 2. I'm probably wrong. Again, this is just Griff's conspiracy theory. All I have to go on is my own observations. This is the conclusion that I have been led to. I have not seen guides, I have not seen walkthroughs, I have not seen any lore videos or interpretations. I'm going 100% off what I have seen, what I have read, what I know. So that is where we're standing. I think that ending sucked. I think that ending sucked hard. Dark Souls 1 ending left people really unsatisfied. I was pretty much good with it. Because you linked the fire, or you walked out like the original badass and said, let's go rule the world. What did you do this time? Nothing. You sat down, they closed the doors, the lights went out, and you're done. Roll credits. They even rolled the credits in this side of the screen. As though like they were going to show you a cool montage over here of like, hey, here's you beating all the bosses or something. There's nothing. Nothing happens. And there's no after the credits scene. There's nothing. Just drops you right back in there, and you can upgrade your shit before you decide you're ready to tackle, New Game Plus. Kind of going out with a whimper there, Dark Souls 2. But so that's the end. That's where I stand with the plot of the game. You can agree, you can disagree. I advise you all who have watched these, play these games. Play them. If you think they're too hard, start with Dark Souls 2. It's more accessible. It's way easier, especially near the end. Play Dark Souls 2. Avoid the optional bosses. Just play it. Then play Dark Souls 1, and then let's sit down and have a conversation. You tell me what you think happened. Because I hope I'm wrong, because that's super fucking lame. But that's where we're standing. So, next time on the Blog of Pain, I'm going to give my final verdict on Dark Souls 2 as a game, less as a story. And that'll pretty much be it for the Blog of Pain. It's pretty much over. Well, guys, this has been Jay Griff. Thanks for listening.